Story 1. Generally speaking, the world was a better place without social media. Story 2. To be honest, the one thing I can say was definitely better in the 1990s was our degree of hope for the future. Story 3. A complete absence of people trying to capture every moment of life on video that no one will ever watch. Story 4. Late 1990s cars with just enough technology to be modern but not so much that they become cumbersome. Story 5. Air travel. Being able to meet someone at the gate and not having to undergo a body cavity search to board a plane. Story 6. I was an adult in the 1990s, so my memories reflect that. We thought the world was getting better. The Cold War was over. We had won. The Soviet Union fell apart in 1991. We expected the pieces to rebuild themselves as democracies with efficient, free market economies. The popular book The End of History argued that the great ideological battles and wars of the 20th century were over and that we had reached the final stage in the evolution of governments. That felt good. We also saw promising technological advances. People bought their first personal computers, digital cameras, cell phones, and global positioning system devices in the 1990s. Netscape was released in 1994 and it was a revelation. The internet seemed like it would unite humanity. On September 11, 2001, we discovered that there were people who had not gotten the memo. Story 7. Not knowing or not really caring about other people's political leanings. Also going to the pub, seeing people you hadn't seen or heard from for a week or so and catching up properly. Social media has totally fucked it. Story 8. People who have always known a life of texting, social media, and constant photo and video taking do not really understand how much fun it used to be to hang out with friends. You were in the moment. No one was buried in a screen, had earbuds in, or was taking selfies. People just socialized. I am lucky to have made it through college before smartphones became common, and I am eternally grateful for it. Story 9. Live concerts used to have reasonable prices and no cell phones held aloft. Fans were connected to the band and to each other. Concerts were an event. Now they are overpriced advertisements. Story 10. Music television played music. There were Saturday morning cartoons. South Park started. People were not worried about being recorded all the time. Story 11. The wealth gap in the United States was smaller, and real wages were higher. Healthcare and jobs were better for working people. Story 12. Being a kid, hanging out with other people, and also being alone. Basically all things that do not have to do with the internet. Laughing out loud, sarcasm. Edit. I got carried away above. I was really just referring to being a kid and spending time in social groups, since we were forced to value that more and had no screen escape. I still think the internet and everything that came with it is awesome and improves life for many. The being alone part was a nod to the fact that you could be truly alone far more easily. Now most people remain connected, and being alone, even on a toilet, far more often means texting, reading news, playing games, shopping, or countless other activities that still interact with people and emotionally are affected by nonsense happening elsewhere. When I mentioned being together and being alone, the word everything was just me poking fun. Story 13. You did not have to hear complaints from strangers every day. Story 14. When the telephone was still attached to the wall, we were freer. Story 15. The vibe of the 90s. I miss those days mainly because that decade encompassed my high school and college years and the first few years of real work. It felt like life before the dark times of bills and responsibility. Story 16. Politics weren't nearly as polarized. It was possible for people to have opposing views and still be cool with each other. Now there is instant aggression. It's strange. I am certain this situation was engineered to produce this exact result, and that makes me even more mad. Story 17. Cost of living, housing, and food are so expensive now. I remember my mother saying we would eat our way into bankruptcy. Our weekly grocery bill for a family of 4 was about $80. We rented a 3-bedroom detached house in San Diego on a single teacher's salary. Story 18. Off the top of my head, one major issue was gender and racial inequality. It was clearly worse then. Story 19. Clothing. I still have sweaters and pants from Gap that I purchased in the 1990s. They are wearing well. I have not purchased anything there in the last 10 years that lasted more than a season before a scene began to come apart. Story 20. Children used to play outside and visit one another's homes. I have many fond memories of hanging out after school with neighbors and playing video games for hours with one or two friends sitting beside me. These days the streets are empty and nearly every child is at home on their devices. One of my children is very social, but most of that socializing happens on Discord. Story 21. Definitely movies. They were fun and took their time. These days it is all about psychological mind games or scene after scene with no real sense that you are watching a complete story from start to finish. Story 22. Music, Saturday morning cartoons, breakfast cereal, and snacks. Story 23. Hope for the future. The September 11th, 2001 attacks changed everything. Since then we have experienced the war on terror, a global financial collapse, the rise of right-wing populism, the coronavirus disease 2019, and now everything that is going on today. It has been relentless. Story 24. Probably using drugs or taking pills. Nowadays doctors do not prescribe them. Street vendors put you at risk of buying a laced pill, and you could end up on a t-shirt. Story 25. Music. There was variety. It hadn't all turned into homogeneous soup. Story 26. Mobile phones. I hate how we have all become addicted to doom scrolling. Story 27. The internet was hard to describe, but there was a certain purity to it. Story 28. I had 30 minutes of internet a week because my parents weren't wealthy or tech savvy. Cost a lot, and they didn't know how to set up anything complicated. When I was allowed online on weekends, it was via CompuServe dial-up. If I wanted information, I had to find it in books, so it was harder to get pulled into conspiracy theories or fall into a non-nuanced, extremely biased opinion echo chamber. It was simpler. I just wanted to talk about Star Wars and Star Trek and read about unidentified flying objects and ghosts. Story 29. Music had more soul. You did not need auto-tune, and artists actually sounded the same live as on their albums. Story 30. Where to start? Quality in products, hugely better than now. I have a portable compact disc player from 2001, but it was manufactured in 1999. The headphone jack is solid and does not fall apart like headphone jacks do these days. Also, the sound is much better for a standard everyday music player compared to today's. Coca-Cola bottles these days bend when you pour. Back in the day they did not bend, and they contained more glass. The solidity of products in general. Appliances were made better than today. Washers and dryers seem like garbage these days. Finding one without digital screens, buttons, and artificial intelligence or smart features that works well from a good brand is hard. One with analog knobs that you turn, made of metal, no plastic inside or out. Community activity was better then than it is now. People's social skills. Now ask yourself, what can be done to fix this? If you really want things to be better like before, rather than staying in a daydream of rosy retrospection, apply action. Start a grassroots initiative and make something for that purpose. Get a feedback loop going, and do not take criticism personally. See it as a challenge for improvement. It is not about diminishing your efforts or you personally. It is about suggestions you can expand on, a potential next step to evolve to the next stage. Story 31. Network television remains popular. Even my children watch shows from the 1990s such as Full House and Home Improvement instead of today's programming. Story 32. No cell phones at concerts. People actually lived in the moment instead of recording for clout or making a poor quality video they might watch once or never. Story 33. Non-digital life was simple, with face-to-face interactions and meaningful connections as the norm. People fully engaged with their surroundings without the constant distraction of digital devices, creating a more authentic and present experience. Story 34. Music. We had so many different genres emerging at once, and you did not have to get pigeonholed into an algorithm. Story 35. Music and music videos. Television shows. We had actual seasons, not this bullshit of one season only to keep you subscribed. Story 36. A childhood without needing to capture every moment and share it. Story 37. I would struggle to pick one. Music, movies, television, cost of living, and barely anyone had heard of Donald Trump. The list is nearly infinite. Story 38. There were no smartphones. People actually talked to each other in person. Story 39. Saturday morning cartoons. Nothing hits that vibe anymore. Story 40. Movies, music, and even cars were unique in the 1990s. Story 41. Music. Indie, dance, hip-hop, turntablism, breakbeat, drum and bass, jungle, big beat, electronica. Gigs were more affordable. Festivals had better atmosphere. Story 42. The internet, in many ways, was better. It was before everything was monetized to oblivion, and people were more interested in sharing knowledge than in making money from misinformation and rage bait. Story 43. I would say most things were better back then until social media, coronavirus disease 2019, and governments ruined the world beyond repair. Story 44. Ordinary pizzas were better. They really lowered the bar to make them fast food. Story 45. McNuggets. All white meat sucks. Bring back chicken nuggets. Story 46. Paying under $1 per gallon for gasoline and being able to go for a drive just because. Story 47. Life in general. It was affordable and I was 30 years younger, so I suppose everything. Story 48. It felt like a progressive time, but we could still talk about certain topics that today would get you labeled phobic. Story 49. I knew when I was done peeing back then. Now I am never quite certain. Story 50. Friends showed up unannounced. It was incredible to hear a knock at the door and wonder who had come through. This has not happened to me in probably 27 years. Story 51. I was a kid in the 1990s, and in my opinion it was the best time to grow up. We were gone from dawn until dusk outside during the summer, unreachable, with amazing and sometimes dangerous playground rides. Disney and cartoons in general were at their peak. Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network dominated. In short, childhood in the 1990s was better for children. Story 52. Fewer subscriptions and prescriptions. We use services to manage them. Story 53. Cost of living. I used to live in Nebraska in 2013. Gas was $2 per gallon, but in Southern California nowadays it is $5 per gallon. Story 54. Summers are too hot now. I used to love them, but now I hate them. Story 55. Taco Bell's menu. Bring back the enchiritos and taco salads. Story 56. Clubbing, going to clubs or illegal raves. There was no fear of being filmed. It was a communal experience. Story 57. Video games. Imagine this. You pay for a game. You own it and get to keep it forever. Story 58. There was privacy. Because there were no smart devices or social media, people lived in the moment. Life waited for you. If you received a call, someone wrote their name and number on a notepad or left a message on the answering machine, and you dealt with it when you came home or the next day if it was a business. There were no cell phones constantly with you, ringing at any hour. People seemed to expect immediate answers, but the world had to wait until you were ready to deal with it. Story 59. For me, it was video home system tapes. We had to rent a video cassette recorder and movies to watch. Being in rural India, there were no cell phones. To visit friends, we had to use a red rotary phone or go see them in person. On Saturdays and Sundays, I left the house after 10 a.m. and returned before 6 p.m. Story 60. Our entire political system and the mass media were far from perfect, but they seem tame compared to today. Story 61. Media. News was still reliable and accurate. The internet was nascent in the mid-1990s and broadband arrived in the late 1990s. It was the Wild West, almost exclusively young people with very low corporate presence and zero social media. Imagine Games Network forums did a great job for community discussion, along with Usenet, chat groups, and instant messaging. Gaming was better overall. Games were excellent, peaking in the early 2000s. The third, fourth, and fifth generations were particularly strong, and the sixth generation reached back toward the 1990s with the Dreamcast. Personal computer gaming was dominant in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Not being hyper-connected to everything was actually great. I miss it sometimes. Toys were much better. I would argue that the 1980s were the peak for toys, but the 1990s were not far behind. Politics was better. It was already moving toward the dumpster fire that it has become in the United States of America, but I miss the days when acting like a fool would torpedo a career rather than win elections. Story 62. Appliances. I still see refrigerators, dishwashers, and washing machines working to this day. I bought a $3,500 refrigerator last year, and the salesman said to expect 8 to 10 years of use. What on earth is that? Story 63. Not being permanently glued to a phone. In the 1990s, you actually had to be somewhere to hang out, and nobody expected instant replies at all hours. It was simpler, slower, and far less exhausting. Story 64. Race relations were much better. Politics focused more on helping the public and was less volatile. Prices for most goods were more affordable, and fast food was inexpensive. Compact disc players produced better sound than today's Bluetooth players. Story 65. Not everyone had a camera on them at all times. I am so glad I was a teenager before social media became a thing. Story 66. Newspapers and nightly news. Today's coverage is overwhelming. We are flooded with information. There is also a lack of quality television programming. It was nice to watch a few shows each week and look forward to them. Now there is simply too much content, far more than anyone could watch, so it is not as good. This pains me to write, but I think I preferred life before the internet. Story 67. There were no smartphones or social media. People still read books and had a longer memory span than a goldfish. Story 68. You mean besides everything? The only things I can say are appreciably better now are CGI and internet bandwidth. Cars became less reliable. The weather got hotter. People became less informed. We became less free and more paranoid. And we destroyed any concept of the truth in the media. Fun. Story 69. It was before the tipping culture and the survey requests every time you bought something. Story 70. The trajectory of the country, progress in race relations and religious tolerance, a sense of hope for the future and alternative rock. Story 71. Geopolitically, the United States stood alone as the sole superpower. Landmines and cluster bombs were being banned. There was talk of nuclear disarmament, and many hoped the world might enter a better age. That hope lasted only briefly. The idea of the end of history now seems like toilet paper, a satirical notion. The world is moving down a dark path. Story 72. There is no need to subscribe to everything if you cannot keep up. Story 73. We had heroes. We thought a greater proportion of people cared about the whole. The music was stellar. The air felt cleaner. We had hope for the future. Story 74. Answering machine or voicemail messages. People used to put effort into them instead of leaving the greeting at the default. Story 75. Politics. Hear me out. Discussing a third presidential term, stripping women of the right to vote, and throwing immigrants to the alligators were all unheard of. Story 76. Television and cartoons were elite. Saturday morning programming was an event. Story 77. The political environment has changed. Sure, we were all angry with each other before, but it wasn't the vitriolic hatred we see now. I would have said it came mostly from the left, but honestly my side has been just as bad lately. People in my circles say really nasty things about liberals. Story 78. Anything related to human connections. Story 79. To be honest, I miss the late 1980s and 1990s a lot. A world before the September 11th, 2001 attacks was amazing, and people who are now adults will never know it. Overton Window. Story 80. Sports cars are lighter, handle better, have hydraulic power steering, and feature interiors with real buttons. There are also more choices, especially from Japan, and greater availability of manual transmissions. Story 81. All media. Instant streaming has destroyed the landscape. Story 82. Life in general felt slower and less overwhelming. You were not constantly bombarded with notifications and other people's highlight reels, which made you feel like you were not doing enough. Story 83. Pretty much everything. Entertainment. Society as a whole. No phones. My youth. Everything but my wealth. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.